Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis, LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengraber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Greetings. This is Paul Holdengraber, your host for the Quarantine Tapes, brought to you by Onassis, LA and Dublab. I am thrilled to announce that we have asked various former Quarantine Tape guests to host during a week guests of their own choice in total freedom. They have absolute carte blanche on their choices. This week, I have asked Eddie Glaude, the distinguished university professor in the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University, to be our host. Eddie Glaude is the author, most recently, of the extraordinary study on James Baldwin, entitled Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and its urgent lessons for our own. I hope you will enjoy these Quarantine Tapes.
I want to welcome, my brother, the brilliant Kiese Laymon, the author of the award-winning memoir, Heavy, an American memoir, Long Division. I can go on and on. Mm-hmm. Just an extraordinary voice on the scene, an amazing writer, and someone whom I've come to love deeply. So I just want to begin, Brother Kiese, with, how you holding on in this mess, man, this madness. How you holding up?
I'm just so happy to be here with you. I feel sturdier talking to you. I'm trying to make it as we all are, and make sure that the people close to me that are more fragile can make it a little bit, before me. My grandmother, my aunts, my mama. And I'm trying to make sure that my work has changed a lot this last 9 months. I'm trying to make sure that my work honors those people. That's pretty much it, man. Trying to drink a lot of water, trying to get that shine that I see you have daily. I'm trying to get it, brother. Trying to get it.
That's that Gulf Coast.
Trying to laugh as well, brother.
Yeah, that's that Gulf Coast water. That brown water.
It must be that brown. We had that brown water in Forest, man. My grandmother's skin it is so incredible. And the water, when we washed our white clothes, they would come out brown. Like that's just what it was.
We're both from Mississippi, so one from Jackson, the other one from the Gulf Coast. But I remember when we used to take showers back home when I was growing up, it would feel like once you got out of the shower that you had already put lotion on.
Brother, Eddie Glaude, let me just say something to you, fam. I love you for many, many reasons, but that lotion feel. You get up. I remember. I mean, you did not have this conversation with me to talk about this, but I remember the first time I didn't feel like I had on lotion when I got out of the bathtub, because my grannies, we didn't have a shower, it was a bathtub. And also, this is a conversation, somewhat about poverty, but also just about collectivity. Like when I was a kid, Granny would get in the bathtub, take her bath, leave the bath water in there. I'd have to give in that bath water after her, right? And it was just because she didn't, that water bill was a monster, But we'd get out, man, we would think we were clean if we felt like lotion was on us.
Yeah.
And then the first time you get real clean water and you're like scrubbing and it's almost like a squeak, I'm like, wait a minute now. What's going on?
My mother would say, that water hard.
That water hard. That's what they call it, Eddie. They call it the hard water, bro. And I'm like, maybe it's just a little clean. I don't know.
It is what it is. But I always know that your grandmother's always close to you. She's a rock. Talk a little bit about your grandmother and how she in so many ways shapes how you see yourself, not only as a human being, but as an artist.
Eddie, man, I think a lot of times it's almost cliche now to say we don't deserve, Eddie Glaude, we don't deserve Imani Perry, we don't deserve Jesmyn Ward. But my granny, fam, like, she reminds me that we actually do deserve abiding, complex, nuanced love. And if we get what we seldom do, which is what we deserve, I think we have to find creative ways to honor it. So in everything that I do and create, there's an attempt, and there's often an attempt to mask the attempt to honor, create critically, like the slices of my grandma. You know, sometimes it could be like I'm following a scent, the cover of Heavy, like I was following her favorite shade of orange red. You know, like I just want to find creative ways to honor the person who introduced me to love, to God, to responsibility, to gumption, to anger, to work, like work. And so, you know, without being didactic, and I fear sometimes I am didactic, I just wanted to always honor the person who gave me really, really life and stayed in Mississippi and gave me a Mississippi life. And this is not disrespecting anybody else in my family. I just want to creatively celebrate my grandmother. And my writing practice and my writing and my work is literally an attempt at honoring, you know, she who allowed a lot of us to breathe.
You know, there's you know, some people might not understand it, but you know, once we get to the page, it can be in so many ways an act of piety, you know.
Yes.
A kind of indebtedness to the source, as you know, Santayana would say, a piety, natural piety is this indebtedness to the sources of our being.
Absolutely.
Right. And so there's the sense of your grandmother. There's also the sense of Mississippi. You have, you know, just watching you inhabit that space, right? You know, I'm always telling people I'm from Moss Point. And
yes.
I shout out my hometown, but you know, I'll be the first one to tell you that I left Moss Point when I was 15, 15,
right.
16.
Right.
I was running away from my dad.
Yes.
I didn't think I was running away from, you know, the SIP. I was trying to imagine the world in much more expansive terms and the like. Talk a little bit about Mississippi and the choice and how it shapes you and the choice to return and write from there now, Doc.
You know what, Eddie, it's so interesting. Like, I've heard the words of that question before, but I've never heard that question the way I just heard it. And my mother was a political scientist. She went to Jackson State University. She had me when she was at Jackson State University at 19. And we came back to Mississippi after she did her graduate work at Wisconsin around, I was like 4 or 5. I went to stay with my grandmother. So I went back and forth between Jackson and Forest. And my mother showed me, like, unintentionally, the importance of Mississippi. And she showed me that, you know, it's a scary place to stay if you can leave. But I just always wanted to, I went to Millsaps to play basketball and football. You know, when I got kicked out of Millsaps, everybody, including Jerry Ward, incredible, was like, you got to get out of Mississippi. I was like, no, I got to get out of Millsaps. I went to Jackson State. And then it was just like, I'm just like, okay, Calvin Herndon, this incredible writer, Oberlin hit me up and he was like, I think this is a place that will accept you because of what happened. I got kicked out of school for something that was ridiculous.
Read him.
Yeah, you know, and he, like, I just been trying to get back ever since. But the crazy thing is, brother, is like Jackson is not Mississippi. That's why I love what you said, right? It's of Mississippi, but it's not Mississippi. And so I thought Jackson was Mississippi. I was talking to Jasmine the other day, and she was talking about how for y'all, New Orleans was the city.
Exactly.
Right. And so in many ways, like we talked about this before, there's so many different Mississippis and there's so many different cities for those Mississippis. And for many of those Mississippis, the city isn't even in Mississippi. Right. So if you live in northern Mississippi, the city is Memphis. Right. You know, for me, the city was Jackson. And I just but I just always wanted to come back. But now that I've come back, I'm really interested in this idea of home being a mobile metaphor. It's a beautiful place for me to work, and I'm trying to figure out a way to live, but I can't live in that part of Mississippi I live at anymore. You know, it's just.
Yeah, I've always worried about you since we've gotten to know each other, you know, in the way that we have, being in that space.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, there's, you know, the pressures, right? Especially, you know, Black excellence in Mississippi, man. That means you got a bullseye on your back.
Talk about it, brother.
On your chest and your back and your head. And, your ass, right? I mean, it's there. So I want to shift a bit though, because I was listening, I told you earlier that I was talking with Natasha Trethewey, and it was just so beautiful on so many different levels. And I listened to your interview with her, your conversation with her, and you talked about worrying about her after Memorial Drive was written, where she was exposing herself. Did you have a similar worry when you wrote Heavy? I I read Heavy in a manuscript form, and I was worried.
Oh yeah.
I was worried, man. Did you worry about? It's not the same kind of worry, but did you worry about that?
I think you'll appreciate this, man. Like, I'm so afraid, brother. Like when you talked to me about your father, last conversation we had, and just the words that I've read of yours, I got it. And like, it's something not right up here for me. I wasn't afraid at all. Do you know what I mean? Like when it comes to like putting those words down on that page and the consequences of those words, like this is not a good thing. This is what my mother and my grandmother been trying to beat out of me my entire. I should have been worried because I wasn't ready. I wasn't fully aware of what I had put out into the world. I wasn't aware of what those words, because for me, man, I'm like you, like I'm a writer's writer, fam. Like I wanted to go out and talk about the art. I wanted to talk about what was left in the margins of that book, because I think the margins of that book are actually much more profound than the actual text intentionally.
Right.
And people wanted to just ask me, did I still love my mom and all that? And then I was like, oh shit, I fucked up. So I should have been afraid, and I should have prepared myself as I was afraid. But I wasn't. But like Natasha, I was so terrified for her to go out on that road with that book. You wrote a very different book than Natasha, right? But like it's like I was afraid because I really read the book. It's not a Baldwin biography, as some people want to just make it. It's so much more. I was afraid of how people would handle what you revealed artfully. And my concern often is that people don't see the artful construction of the revelation. They just focus on the raw revelation. So, but I don't get too scared about myself when it comes to the writing. And that's a fault.
Yeah. The trauma porn, as we talk about it, right?
Yes.
Is so deep. People just want to revel either we're bigger, right, Thomas, or we're just some form of Willie Horton or Bigger Thomas, right?
Yes.
We're either one of those two, right?
Yes.
But talk a little bit about the margins again. I want you to, because you ran past it, fam, but I want you to settle down there. You said what was going on in the margins. It's like those moments, those silences in Natasha's book.
Right.
Silences reminded me of my crib, but the margins in your crib. Talk about those margins.
I just think not to get too heady with people, but I think sometimes when we talk about utilizing the white space as writers, I think sometimes we only think about the white space that connects a line in between a line or in between the graph and another graph. But the reality of the work is that, like, if it's justified left for paragraph, but there's margins on both sides. And though people might not know it, what I want to do when I write is create text often that lets you know that there's a lot of text running out here in these margins. And that's when people get into text and they see it as more than a spectacle, meaning they have to make decisions, not just do I want to keep reading, but this makes me laugh, makes me cry, and makes my skin crawl. So I have to decide which one of those feelings I think is okay. And I think if you can invite readers that way through the use of subtext / marginalia, you can get them to feel like this book is mine. And then they say stuff like, this is so different than my experience, but and part of what they think that you've shown them is universality. But what you've really done is you've invited them into a white space, which with you to embody. I'm not being spiritual or weird or anything. I literally believe that. But you create subtext. There are many ways. One way, you have to overwrite and you have to take some of the stuff out. Meaning that you can't be precious about it. You can't like precious writers do not have subtext. They have omission. Omission is different. Like once you realize that like this might be my next to best graph in the book, but taking this graph out and having readers wonder about the relationship between graph 1 and graph 3, it might do the work for me. Sometimes I just think that work is rated, but also we don't really know how to talk about it publicly. But the margins, fam, the margin, that's where the work is.
I was talking to a young writer today, earlier today, Doc, and he former football player at Clemson, Started his second year. Walk on. Started. He was that dope.
Walk on,
Doc. And he part of the championship teams, but guy's name is Dante Stewart. He's brilliant young man. And I was trying to hit him off with the importance of revision in this work that we do. And I was like, it's like having to run that route,
right?
And people want you to run it consistently. I don't need that juke. I just need you to hit it and plant and go, right? And so, how do you learn how to run it crisply? You're gonna have to figure, lead. And I said that's part of the process of kind of winnowing down, getting to that, understanding what you got to leave. It might look nice, but you throws you off just for a second, right? So
just
a second, right? And he just went, oh. So I was trying to prepare him for the real work, and that is that revision work.
Yeah.
Right? So you can start doing the crafting, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk about craft a lot, you teach craft.
Right.
Who are your resources in your head, Doc? I mean, writerly resources. Who are you in conversation with?
Oh my goodness. See, when I think about conversation, I think about text. You know, I think often people ask that question, they ask about people, but I am in a deep conversation right now with Parable of the Sower. And as a construction, because I'm trying to write this novel and I wanted to do something Octavia Butler did. So I'm in conversation with that right now. Another book that's guiding me in this non-fictive work that I'm doing is this incredible work by Ray Pears, incredible writer. It's called The Forgetting Tree.
Forgetting Tree? The
Forgetting Tree. And and I'm trying to look at texts that use like what people could traditionally call poetry and traditionally call prose in ways that feel just like completely necessary and organic. And I think she pulls that off in that book. So I've just been reading those the last 2 or 3 days. You know how it is with us, like it changes every few days. But Parable of the Sower and The Forgetting Tree are what I've been trying to. Imitation. It's trying to imitate. I think innovation is what we hope to do. Talking to you about this, you completely innovated with your last book, but to do that, as we said before, talking about Baldwin, sometimes you have to imitate, right? The problem is when you imitate and you think you're innovating. So I just sometimes try to write like a person in a particular text, and then try to look at that text and see how I can, make it mine. But imitation is very worthwhile in the process. I don't think it's not worthwhile as an ending. I don't think.
No, absolutely. I mean, you listen to early Coltrane, who you gonna hear?
Yes.
You listen to early Winton. Who you gonna hear? You're gonna hear these folks are whether it's Miles, whether it's Lester Young, you're gonna hear the folks that they're learning from, right?
Yes.
I guess my biggest worry when I was writing Begin Again was, I used this image in my head. I was like, man, I don't want Baldwin to just run me over like a beer can in the street, just flatten me out. Right. And then I find myself just trying, bad imitation on the page. I got to find my voice. And so what kind of sentences are mine, right, that reflect my voice? Well, obviously, I'm indebted to this dude. I'm indebted to these philosophers that I've been reading. So what are my sentences? So when you describe a Kiese Laymon sentence, I've seen you on Instagram where you doing language things, where you pronouncing words and you're hilarious. How would you describe the sentence that when you read it, you hear you know it's yours?
Brother, you were too good at this. Okay, so I'm gonna talk. I want to be brief because my mind just got clouded with so many words when you asked me that question. But man, I grew up like wanting to be an MC, and so like my natural writing home is like overwriting, like verbose, look at me type writing, right? Like that. Right. That's what I'm most comfortable with, and that's what I'm most fearful of giving, because I don't actually like that writing, but my first drafts are just like that. And some people can do that in a way that brings attention to the art, like Paul Beatty, and I think some people can do that like in a way that meets the art, and that would be me. So because of that, my favorite sentences are sentences that work against what my natural inclination might be. And it might be a sentence like, there's a sentence in Long Division, which was so hard for me to craft. And the sentence is simple, right? It's this one boy talking about who he thinks is his arch enemy, but he's really trying to work through like the difference between homosocial and homoerotic feelings he has for this kid who is his arch enemy. And he just writes, in all of my dreams, I see Lavender Peeler. In all of my nightmares, I see Lavender Peeler. That might be this, that might be this. But you know what? That feels like love to me. That sentence is one of the hardest sentences I've ever written. It sounds like rudimentary, but like that felt like love to me. One, because I could imagine a 13-year-old boy thinking and feeling it, but never saying it. And also as a grown man, like that's not a sentence that I utter, but it's a sentence that I long to utter. You know, that felt like love to me. That's one of the sentences I'm most proud of. And it's also one of the most simplistic sentences I think I've ever written.
So okay, now you just gave me a lot there, right? That your natural instincts, is, to overwrite, to call this way. So, so the revision process for you, it has to be intense then, because you have to be ruthless.
Yeah, every line can't be, some lines gotta be pips, bruh. Like every line can't be Gladys Knight. You know what I'm saying? Like, and like every line cannot be a pip. And I think coming from the place we come from, a lot of times we want every line to be its own character and have its own like da-da-da. And you can do that. And I like some of that writing, but is it in the service of the graph? And is the graph in the service of the page? And is that page in the service of the book? And then the larger question is that book in the service of a liberatory vision? And sometimes these look at me sentences, if they escalate, I think you can lose the vision, because the vision is, you necessarily lose the vision if you're like, let me create these sentences that show the world how dope I am as a sentence. I appreciate it. I love it when I listen to it in music. It's not what I want to do as a writer, but it's what I initially do in all my first drafts.
Fam, that's helpful, because there's some moments in the later Baldwin's writing where he slips into that.
And in Baldwin, how do you feel about him slipping into that, Eddie? Like, what do you think about the fact that James Baldwin could slip? Because to me, that feels a bit insecure, right? So what do you think about the fact that he could slip into that later?
Well, a couple of things, right? So he's always at the end of his career, he's navigating the fact that he's Baldwin.
Yes.
So sometimes you can fall for the okie doke, right? You can fall for
yes, you can.
You know what I mean? You can start believing your own stuff, right? So there's this kind of the artifice of eloquence, right? You just kind of I'm just gonna flex right now, right? And so that happens sometimes on the page, right? You can just say, oh, well, he didn't sit with that. He wrote that and just moved on. I could see him writing that at 3:00 in the morning, thinking it was dope, and and he was on to the next thing. He was in London the next day, something like that. So I think it has a lot to do with not spending the time that revision requires,
right?
And sometimes that ruthlessness that revision requires of us can run up against our egos, and our egos get big when people say we can write.
Ooh, do they?
And
do you still feel that? Do you as Eddie Glaude, the person who we see and know and read now, do you still feel that when people say, "Damn, not you're smart, you're incredible, you're incisive, but man, Eddie can write." What do you feel?
That's new to me, Doc. That's relatively
new to you.
Outside of outside of a narrow academic community, right? Somebody would say, Exodus was a really nice book, and the Shade was good. So there's a really narrow academic community that I've written in that people say, my prose is clear, But Begin Again was for me this announcement to the world. I'm a writer. I'm a
writer.
I'm doing something else. I'm doing something otherwise, right? I'm doing something else when I'm in my shed, look at me. When I'm in my shed, right? I'm working on something else. I'm not just trying to do this thing that y'all doing in the academy. I'm trying to do something else. And so sometimes you can get that ego will lead you to get attached to a sentence in ways that you can't be if you're going to engage in that revision process that you just described earlier,
What do you say to the reader? It doesn't have to be academic reader, but the reader who might read academic prose, who might say, just generally believes that you sacrifice complexity for wider writerly accessibility. Like, do you believe that the book, that the Begin Again, if that's the book that made you a writer? Because to me, I've read every book you've written, and I don't think anything is sacrificed. But I think there's those people who believe that things that are mass produced are necessarily like not as intellectually rigorous or dense. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's silly. It's like when I tell my students and they come into and they're writing these flower overwritten sentences and da da da, and I give them this example of a fall day and an oak tree is in the middle of the yard and you describing on this gorgeous fall day the sun da 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 the leaves are flowing da 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 and then you compare that sentence to that tree looks like it's on fire.
Right.
Which one is doing more work here?
Right.
And is simplicity here is a simple sentence here simplicity, or does it carry the weight of the complexity of the emotion that's being felt?
Yes.
Right. So I cut my 3 C's as I tell my students. I want you to be clear. I want you to be concise because being clear and concise is what makes you compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that. So when people say, writing for a large audience is sacrifice complexity. I'm like, not necessarily. Sometimes it can, sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
But for me, what it announces is that I got control over my bibliography now.
That's it, fam.
I don't have to perform it for you now.
That's it.
You don't need to know that this is what Aristotle is doing because I got it now.
Got control.
So I'm controlling it as opposed to letting my citational practice control me.
And I think that control of bibliography, I'm reaching here, but I also see it as a way writers sometimes feel more comfortable accepting that as writers, we control literary time, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of us read or say we read Obama's Volume 1. And there's so much that we can talk about like blah, 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 and why did he say this and blah, 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 blah. And, I'm not going to get any of that. But just in terms of writing, there's that section where, he talks about being in school and he talks about like the ethereal, what does he say? The ethereal, bisexual, right? He says like the ethereal bisexual, right? Now, or something like that. He gives some crazy adjective, and then he reduces this person who's a woman to blah blah blah. For example, if you control your bibliography and you control time, there's a way you can write that sentence that shows the reader you are critiquing your desire to categorize these women as bisexual, tree hugging, whatever. But I think Obama in that section, for example, didn't realize he is in control of time, right? Like you like, yes, it's bad writing, but the point is when we're young, we think in bad writing terms. But I just think like, I'm using that as an example where he didn't control time well enough. He's supposed to like pan out and look at not just his action, but his desire to call them that as being fraudulent, not just the fact that like he was trying to get played, which was fraudulent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
To control time and critique the writerly desire to define these women that way. And if you control your bibliography and your time, you can do it in a sentence.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And I just think sometimes we don't do that work.
Exactly. Listen, I don't want to hold you too much longer, but we could chop it up for a while.
Oh, brother, I'm so grateful to be here with you. Thank you.
But I want us to we're talking about what we control as writers. We can't. This is writing not in a time of cholera, but in a time of madness. How do you, as an artist, I know you revel in the joy. I know it. You revel in the joy. Yeah. But how do you mobilize your pain on the page, right? So part of my own, and I'm opening up here. Mm-hmm. The way in which I've done it in the past is that I'm a compartmentalizer. Mm-hmm. So I can put things in boxes and I move sequentially. Mm-hmm. So it allows me to have several things going on at the same time. It allows me to confront crises in a very, I'll lose my mind over a small detail, but in the midst of the biggest crises on the planet, and that's the way in which I've managed, the fear deposited in my gut. That's the way in which I've managed growing up with my dad. How do you manage, that's not even the right verb. How do you draw on the pain that is inevitably a part of the life that is yours, and how do you get it on the page, or does it make itself on the page?
Yeah, I mean, some of it does, and I mean, I think the goal is to allow as much of it as possible without overwhelming the page or you to make it. But I pray, brother. Like and this is my grandma. I mean, my grandmother taught me how to pray when I was about 5 or 6, 7, 8, something like that. And, you know, every knee must bend. She got me. I watched her pray. She tells the story to this day, even though she has dementia. She starts saying my name to who she calls the Lord. I start knocking on her head. Granny, don't say my name to that man. Don't say my name. And she's like, boy, you better come down here and start praying. And prayer for me, like bending my knees every day, was the precursor to my writing process. Like the times I would get in bed as a young person, I wouldn't want to get on my knees. I wouldn't want to bend my knees to recollect the pain, the joy, the wonder, the imagination. But that getting on sometimes I would curl my legs up in bed and I'd be like, oh, they're shaped like I'm on my knees. But that sort of like bodily reminder to yourself that there's this physical thing you need to do with your body in order to hear. And then with the writing, it's just like trying to render some of the things I hear, if they're painful, if they're joyful, if they're whatever. The other day I was writing and praying, and I saw myself as like a 10-year-old boy who got sent to stay with my grandmother because I had like an egregious case of chickenpox. And my grandmother, I sat there in her mirror and I had all my clothes off, and I remember crying. And my grandmother, man, she held me in her church clothes, and I was sitting in front of that mirror naked. You know, at that point, your body, when you're that young, you've never seen your own body. A lot of us haven't seen our bodies be just like inundated with scabs and pus and all this stuff. And brother, when that woman hugged me, oh my God, in them church clothes, that's prayer, fam. I'm not saying that trying to center anything actually that is remotely related to like conventional notions of Christ, but the act of praying and listening, that's what I heard. And seeing that act manifest in somebody who can responsibly love as well as my grandmama ultimately led me to my writerly practice, which is a kind of prayer daily. And that's how I deal with it. That's the honest. I mean, I pray.
And we have been blessed because you've been praying, and, you know, we've been reading those prayers, Doc, you know, to bring it full circle, man, back to grandma, you know, I mean, my Lord.
Yeah.
So I know you got to go, but what's next, man? What's I know you say you got something you in the shed. What's going
on? I got a book due in a week. Thank you. I'm in bad shape, but there's a reissue of Long Division coming out, which is going to be super solid, publishing it the way I always wanted to. And then the first book that should be coming out after that is a book called Good God. And I just want to leave it right there.
No, just hold it. But you know, there's a whole story we need to tell about those first two books, man. You know, I read that piece in the New York Times about white publishing, and you immediately came to mind, you know, about the journey that you've made. But you know, you're such an example. I want to just, you know, lift you up and thank you for the example that you set for so many folk, man. And you know, thank you for that and so much more, Eddie. Like we being from Mississippi and also just being brothers from the South, you know, we follow and we protect. And I feel like you've allowed some of us to follow and learn as we follow, and you have protected often without saying any of our names. Like you've done a lot of protection for a lot of us. So thank you, brother. And you know, I want to lift up Imani too, because you know, if it wasn't for Imani Perry, bro, I wouldn't know you. You wouldn't know me because I would not have a job, bro. Like I would not have had a book. I would not have literally that's not hyperbole. I don't want to get into it too much, but I did not know we could do that. And then I read Imani, and then I was like, oh, okay. I can't do that, but I have to do more than I think they've told me I can. Wow. And Imani Perry did that. No question. Well, all right, bro. You stay strong, and I can't wait to see. Good God. Thank you so much, Eddie, man.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.